Time magazine a few years ago had a picture of Richard Morris, the kind of a political guru who was advising the president, President Bill Clinton. When all of a sudden he got caught, there were pictures that he had been with a prostitute. I just wonder what that would be like. You know, you think you're getting away with something, no one knows, you're hiding and you're secret. When all of a sudden, the whole world knows, and there's pictures of you, there's pictures of her, there's no question about it. Your wife knows, everybody knows. You're caught. There's times I've taken a computer printout up in front of my church, and I've said, you know, our church headquarters has sent us this software where we now know all your sins. I know what you do when no one else is watching. I know what you do at night. I know what you do in your mind. I know what you do in your private time that you may think no one else knows, but I know. Of course, it's not true, but I want them to think it's true, that God has given pastors a special knowledge of what everyone else is doing. But you think about it, if you just committed a few sins, let's say, 3 sins a day, you total that up. So I tell my church, 3 sins a day, 365 days a year, there's 1,000 sins per person. We have 1,000 people there in church on any given week. You just do the math. How many sins that is? 100,000, million sins. What are we going to do about it? These sins. The whole debate says, one group will say, don't worry about it. It's covered by grace. Doesn't matter. It's legalism to worry about it. Denies the cross. Jesus has died for them, so forget about it. Don't worry about it anymore. Another group would say, don't focus on the sin. Focus on your faith. Focus on your relationship. And gradually the sins will go away. But there's a little problem. What if the sins don't seem to be going away? What does that mean about your relationship if the sins after 30, 40 years are still there? What do you do with that? And then, of course, there's the more conservative group that are saying, no, you have to worry about those sins. God calls people to holiness and to keep the 10 Commandments and to victory. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. And you have got to get rid of those sins and have victory over every single sin. The sins that you act, the sins that you don't do, the sins of omission, and the sins in your mind have to all be gone. Or God will blot your name out of the Lamb's Book of Life. What are you going to do about sin? What does faith have to do with it? Well, we'll deal with one of the great stories in the Bible, the story of Rahab. Rahab the prostitute. Hebrews 11 verse 31 says, by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. The prostitute. I grew up in Thailand where we would see prostitutes. There were parts of Bangkok where we were that were known as the red light district, Pat Pong Road. Tourists would come and walk down Pat Pong Road. Even as a high school student, I can remember being just sick because the American GIs would come over from Vietnam during the Vietnam War and have a week or two for R&R, rest and relaxation, recreation. And, of course, they would like to meet some girls, and so they would find these girls. And these beautiful young Thai, beautiful girls from all over Thailand, pure and wonderful girls would come. No other way to make a living sometimes. They would come to Bangkok thinking someone was going to help them. They would be enticed. They would be bought from their parents. And they would come to Bangkok, and then they would become young teenage prostitutes. And we would see the GIs with these girls in the cars. Girls didn't love them. Prostitutes. Rahab was a prostitute. My wife is Dutch. We went to Holland to see her family one time years ago and going to go to see some churches and things there in Amsterdam. And I couldn't find parking. We parked in a place, and as we began to walk, we realized I had by accident parked next to the red light district. And here at 10 o'clock in the morning, they have these windows. And girls would stand in those windows and wait to be chosen. horrifying to me, horrifying. How could they let this happen in their soul? That's something you can wash off. You can go home and you can wash some things off. You cannot wash that away. Rahab was a prostitute. I can remember being in Singapore in high school for Chinese New Year. We would all go buy fireworks, and we would light these fireworks and throw them out into the basketball court. But a couple times I didn't throw it fast enough, and it went off in my hand, and this hand would sting, and you would race over to the water and try to wash this off. You could not wash it off. This force of the sting in your hands. You cannot wash off this kind of sin, the stain in the soul. Rahab was a prostitute. She lived in Jericho, small little city, and the Israelites came. I imagine the small little town, everyone knew who she was and what she did. And at night, men would sneak up into her little apartment, and they would sneak out at night. She was a prostitute. We don't know if she did it by choice or if it's something she felt she had to do to economically survive, take care of her kids. It doesn't say. But one night, two men knock on the door, but they are not clients. They are Israelite spies who have been sent to spy out the land, and they come to the door. And the people hear about it, and the king is after them, and they are needing to hide. And she has a choice. And she hides them. So the king comes and he sends messengers, and she lies to the messengers and says, yes, they were here. I don't know who they were, I don't know what they were doing, but they're gone. I don't know where they went. Hurry up if you want to catch them. They went that way. But she had hidden them up on the flat part of the roof of her house under the flax. And then when they were gone, it says in Joshua chapter 2, verse 9, here's what it says. I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom ye completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. It's incredible. We have heard what God has done. So here's her faith. Rahab, a prostitute. It says she has faith. What does it mean, her faith? Her faith was this. Because I have heard what God has done for you in the past, I believe what God will do for you in the future. Faith is not blind. Faith is not just something you have to somehow come up on your own. It is based upon something you know. She had heard the story of what had done. God had worked out the miracle. She says, God did it once for you. He'll do it again. Faith. Faith. And now she switches sides. Verses 12 and 13. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. The exciting part of this story is that somehow Rahab had figured out in a pagan environment and in her environment as a prostitute that somehow God's heart was big enough to include her. Where did she get it? I don't know. How did she know and have a picture of God that God could forgive a prostitute? I don't know. Did the two Israelite spies lead her? I don't know. But somewhere she switched sides from her pagan prostitute past and switched sides and says, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to trust that somehow God, who was going to destroy my city, will somehow save me because I've been kind to you. And she switches sides. All the pagan gods around her believed that if you had disaster that would came to you would be because of punishment. You get what you deserve. And so they were going to come take over her city. It would be because of her sin, because she was a prostitute. And she would get what she deserved. And she goes against her pagan culture. and says, no, sin will not deserve a punishment. I am going to trust in grace that somehow God is going to forgive me, even though I've been a prostitute. And so faith is, first of all, believing in a certain picture of God, that God is like this and not like the current culture says. Faith. But that is not enough. You have to do something about it. She takes her life and the life of her whole family, and she stakes all of that on her belief that these people will remember her when they come. And she acts upon it. Says, I'll take care of you, and I'm going to trust that you'll remember me when you come back to our city. And so she protects them when they promise to spare her family. And all she has, she puts all of her future on hanging this scarlet cord down out of the window of her house. She gets her whole family. She stays inside. She trusts that somehow, though everyone else is out watching, and while they are marching around, she is trusting in God. She does something. She acts upon her faith and says, I will believe. And so now their whole family is trusting in one thing, that scarlet cord. You can see all the meanings of this. And on the seventh day, they march around 7 times, and they shout, and the walls come tumbling down, and they come in, and they destroy the whole city, except Rahab the prostitute, because of this one thing, this scarlet cord standing between her and death. And the prostitute trusted in the scarlet cord. It's an amazing story. And she ends up in Hebrews 11 with Moses and David and Noah and Abraham and Enoch and all the others. And here's a prostitute in the great giants of faith because she trusted in God. She's been forgiven, and she believes that God will wipe the slate clean of all the prostitution because she trusted in God and that scarlet cord. You think about all the baseball players that are not in the Hall of Fame. Pete Rose, one of the greatest hitters in baseball, over 4,000 hits. 3,000 put you in the Hall of Fame. He has over 4,000 championships, not in the Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe Jackson in the movie Field of Dreams, great player. They think he cheated. The Black Sox, he's not in. You think about all the others. Now today in our environment, we have Barry Bonds and all the others who may not ever be in the Hall of Fame, who did terrific things athletically, but because maybe they used steroids or committed some other infraction, they will never be in the Hall of Fame. But yet in God's Hall of Fame, we have Abraham who lied several times about his wife. He's in the Hall of Fame. David committed murder and adultery. He's in the Hall of Fame. Noah who got drunk. He's in the Hall of Faith. And Rahab the prostitute is in the Hall of Faith. Unbelievable. If you strung all the sins together of Moses and Abraham and David and Noah and all the others, you would say there's no way. These should be the dirty dozen, not the Hall of Faith. But they're in the hall. That's why we sing the song Amazing Grace, or the other song, I'm Just a Sinner Saved by Grace. That's the great message of Hebrews chapter 11. And obviously, the easy line is, if there's hope for Rahab, there's hope for all of us. If God can forgive being a prostitute and murderers and liars, He can forgive us. Even our computer printout on 100,000 sins, small or big, God can forgive them all. Nothing is too big for God. The story of Rahab is not just for the prostitutes of the world. It is for all of us. And we can say, okay, is there a little bit of Rahab in all of us? She found pleasure in the wrong places. Any of us done that? Going to the wrong places to get pleasure. I've done that. She took something that was supposed to be pure and holy and turned it into something that was evil and sinful and wrong. And she made it cheap and ordinary. Have you done that? Taking holy things, holy Sabbath, holy tithe and offerings, holy body, and do things that make it cheap and ordinary. We've all done that. There's a little bit of Rahab in all of us. She didn't trust God to give her pleasure and a good life. We're supposed to say, God, I will give you a life and life more abundantly. She says, no, I'm not going to trust you, God. I'm going to go get it myself. Have you done that? And we go get pleasure and we get it from some other source than God. She allowed the image of God to be trampled in her. She didn't keep up the boundaries that she should have kept up in her life. She couldn't say no to protect her humanity, and she allowed her humanity to be defaced against the image of God that had been given to her. We've all done that. I've done that. We were all made to represent the image of God, and we don't protect our boundaries, and we let sin come in. I've done that too. A little bit of Rahab in all of us. All through the Bible, God uses adultery to symbolize any time that we go away from God. Anytime we don't just have a relationship with God, but we go other way, to other gods, to other relationships. Other things become more important to us in our life. That is all the way through the Bible, adultery. And God says, how can you do this? I've loved you. I gave my life for you. I've given you everything. How can you go away to other lovers? Revelation 14, it is those who have not been with women, who have been pure and faithful, monogamous to God, who are 144,000. We've all betrayed and denied God in one way or another and committed adultery. So we have to be very careful. You don't have to be a prostitute to understand the story of Rahab is for us. A little bit of Rahab in all of us. And so the power of these stories in Hebrews 11 is that we're all in those stories. Abraham lied in order to make life easier. We've all done that. We've all done some of Noah. We've all done some of Moses, getting angry. Do I have to do this for you? And hit the rock. We've all done a little bit of that. We've all done a little bit of David. We've all committed murder and adultery and anger in our heart and hatred. We have committed a little bit of all those people. But if they can be in Hebrews 11, then you and I can be there. That's the incredible miracle. If we will just keep putting out the red cord, wow, the marching is going around and the walls of the city are going to come tumbling down someday. As long as you and I are trusting in the scarlet red cord of the blood of Jesus Christ, then you and I will be part of that group who will be part of the people of Israel in the promised land. You can see the parallels. Are you trusting in the scarlet cord when the walls go tumbling down? Well, there's another story that is in the context here. Is the story of Achan. You know the story. It says in Joshua chapter 6, verse 35, talking about Rahab, she lives among the Israelites to this day. Here this woman that was a pagan in Jericho, a prostitute, now she rejects that culture and that group of people, and she now joins herself to Israel and says she lived among the Israelites to this day. And now she ends up being part of the Matthew 1 genealogy. You go down and you find by Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. One of the four women in Matthew 1 in the genealogy of Christ. She switches sides. She goes from pagan culture. And because she trusts in the red scarlet cord, she becomes part of the ancestors of Christ. Incredible. Incredible. Rahab the prostitute. And she's an Israelite, part of the family of Christ. You can go through this story. It could be that Salmon was even one of the two spies. There's a tradition that says that. And he falls in love and goes back and he marries the prostitute that saved his life. Who knows? We'll find out someday. He makes her respectable. They have a son, Boaz, who marries Ruth. They have a son, Obed, who has Jesse. They have a son down to David, King David, and on down the line. Maybe some of these generations are skipped. We do not know perfectly these generations, but it comes down to Christ, of whom was born Jesus, who was called Christ. And Rahab the prostitute becomes part of the royal line of the family and genealogy of Jesus. The Catholic Church teaches what is called the Immaculate Conception, where for the Immaculate Conception, in order for Jesus to be born without sin, his mother had to be born without sin. And so Mary was born, they say, without original sin. Well, how far back are you going to go? For Mary to be born perfect, do you have to go back to her mother and back to her mother all the way back? No, you cannot, because eventually you end up with Tamar and Rahab and a prostitute. It's not an immaculate conception. That Jesus Christ is able to give grace and to use people in his plans that were not born without sin. So the point is not that Jesus was pure because his mother was pure. The miracle is that Jesus is pure when his mother was not pure. Mary was not born with immaculate conception. She was born with original sin like the rest of us, we as Protestants believe. The miracle that Jesus Christ was able to live a perfect and righteous life in spite of that. And can come out pure and holy. And that's the promise that we can do with sin. No matter how many sins we've committed, it is possible by the blood and grace and power of Jesus Christ to come out righteous and pure and be used to build up the kingdom of God. God is able to take all kinds of people and give them this incredible miracle of worth. Rahab was a prostitute. She becomes part of Israel. She has worth and dignity before God. It's an incredible thing. The walls open up. So there's miracles in Hebrews over and over again. The walls open up when the Red Sea is opened up. And some of you need that miracle. You have situations in your life that you cannot get through. You cannot imagine how you can get through from here to there. It seems hopeless. And the answer is someday there will be a miracle of the Red Sea. Walls open up. There are the miracles of walls come tumbling down. When they can march around that city without using any army or any physical force, the walls come tumbling down. And they can walk in and claim their city. Some of you need some walls to come tumbling down. Walls that divide, walls in your family, walls at work, walls of some kind or another. And Jesus says, I have lowered the wall and made all one in Christ. But some of you need the miracle of the wall, of worth, the gift of worth. Where Rahab is a prostitute, where she has lost all her human dignity and the image of God that God had given to her. And by the miracle of grace and that red scarlet cord, she is given worth again. And she becomes a wife and a mother and a human being and an ancestor of Christ. Some of you may need that, whatever you have done. God is a God who is always giving new beginnings, new creation, and giving us the gift of worth. We are all as vulnerable on this as anybody. There's times I feel defeated, don't feel good about yourself, and you want to use all kinds of things to try to cover up a sense of lack of self-worth inside of us. We all need compliments. We all feel lonely and hurt and inadequate and inferior and insecure. But if we can go to Jesus, rather than going to all the fig leaves of life and trying to find a way to cover up and using clothes or jewelry or things or money or degrees or anything else to give us self-worth, Jesus says, come to me. And if you'll just trust in me and put out the red scarlet cord, I will come in and I will give you life and I'll make you part of the kingdom of Israel. Self-worth again. Well, we have one last part of the story, is the story of Achan. What are we going to do with Achan? You remember the story. The walls came tumbling down. And then there was the story of Ai over here. So they thought because they had a great victory in Jericho, no problem with Ai, they sent a small little group and a disaster. And they come to God and said, what went wrong? You're having sin in your camp. So you know the story. They drew lots. They drew all of Israel together, and they drew lots down through the families. Which tribe? This tribe. Which family? This family. And finally, who in the family? What household? The household of Achan. And they come to Achan, and they said, is it true? Well, yes. I saw some beautiful garments, and I took some of those garments, and I took some money, and I buried it. He wanted something from this. You think about this. He had to be stoned and killed, and all his family. Terrible. Part of the tribe of Judah. So you think about the irony of this. Rahab is a prostitute. She is pagan. She's part of Jericho. Achan is part of the tribe of Judah. He should be in the line of Christ. And yet he is not satisfied with who he is. He's marched across the desert for this moment to finally come to the promised land. He has not been laid to rest. He has followed the two spies. He has come all the way through all the 40 years. And now it's not enough. He's not satisfied. He wants something more for his self-worth. And he steals some clothes and some money. And he ends up being stoned. And he is out of the Israelites. And Rahab is brought in. She had no self-worth, and she gets self-worth. Achan had everything. He doesn't feel good enough about himself. He has to get some clothes and some money to feel better. And he ends up out. This great switch, the shaking time, which will happen at the end of the world. Her faith at the end wipes out all her history of prostitution, and she becomes, in Hebrews 11, and becomes part of the lineup of Christ. Achan lives a life. He sins at the end, and he ends up out of the family of God. He's been living straight, sins at the end. She's been living wrong and goes straight. There's that kind of shaking time is going to happen at the end of the world. He's born in the tribe of Judah. He is out. She's not born. She ends up in the tribe, and she becomes part of Israel. It's an incredible thing. Rahab's house stands. All the walls have been smashed around her. Her house stands. Achan ends up under a pile of stones. And that's going to be at the end of the world. Some people, even with their small sin, no matter how righteous they have been the rest of their life, if they are not committed to Christ until the very end under the red robe, the red scarlet cord, they will end up under a pile of stones, and they will call for the stones to fall down upon them. While those of the Rahab, while there's stones, rubble all around them, their house will stand. This incredible switch, the shaking time. We are all marching through the desert today. I don't know how much longer it's going to be. How will you finish? Will you finish like Rahab, trusting in the red scarlet cord, and your house will stand? Or will you be like Achan, living a righteous life, but it's not enough at the end, and you want something more to give you self-worth? Where are you getting your self-worth? From Christ or from the others? Or will you be like Rahab, who you've been prostituting yourself with the world, but you make the right decision, and you trust in the red cord, and you get the final truth about God, that God is a God who forgives, and you make your stand upon that God. And you'll say, I'm with them. I'm with that kind of God. And you put out the red cord. It's a choice. Rahab or Achan. Stones standing or a pile of stones. It's your choice.